one of the main topics today is, and kind of one of the topics that always comes up when someone joins the foundation new, is how do I start getting my organization understanding what the hell FinOps is and getting buy-in about executives saying, I want to support it, getting engineers to think about it. How do I get the ball rolling? So this wasn't in our initial content plan for the year, but it keeps coming up over and over again. So we thought we would restart a special interest group that we had last year on adopting and adapting FinOps in a lot of ways. Ashley Hromatko put her hand up to lead this. Ashley has been kind of a star in the FinOps community, I feel like, the last 2 years. She has that badge, the charter member badge that only 26 have. None of you who don't have that can ever get that. That was the original group who started this back in the day. And she's been doing this at Pearson at massive scale across lots of different clouds for a long time, and also interfacing with the sort of IT side and the TBM side and all those folks as well. So really glad to have you leading this, Ashley. I'll pass it over to you, but looking forward to seeing the content and also hearing about the working group.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's always nice a couple years ago going and trying to figure out what my job's going to be and finding the website. I think it was, only launched a month when I found your guys' website. So I always reference it. You guys helped me figure out what I was doing to begin with. But I'm really, really excited about this group. It's the number one question I get often too is like, how do you even sell a FinOps group? How do you pitch it? How do you get your team to buy into it? And so I think that this will be really helpful to a lot of folks that are maybe on that early stages where you're part of the community and you're kind of an individual and you see this need in your company and you want to launch this, but you need maybe like that as supplemental material of how to like pitch it. So that's one of the personas that we really see. So that individual. And I think there's another persona in adopting FinOps, and that's really the executive teams. We have to remember that this is a new concept to them as well. And so they're going to be looking for like, how can they measure it? How can they support a FinOps team? Like they're going to give you some type of funding or personnel to do this. They're also going to need to be able to adopt to a new FinOps practice within their organization in the shift that's going to occur. We also feel like there's another persona, which is, you actually have a FinOps team and you're executing. So you're in the process of building it. We're going to kind of keep that persona out of this work group just because we feel like there's other, there's the framework work going on. There's other kind of work groups that are really around when you're built. So we're really focused on that individual that's trying to sell it for the first time, and then that executive team that's trying to support it for the first time. So that's kind of our primary focus here. Go next slide, JR. So diving into this, we said often we get asked, like, how do you create a FinOps practice with your organization? And the response is instantly get your executive buy-in first, right? And so this working group will be kind of curating content that can be customized for your company to help make sure you can pitch bringing the FinOps practice to your organization. We'll get together and we'll kind of build out what this is. Ultimately, we've got some sample slide decks that we started with. We've started a little bit of an outline. Like if you could only do 10 decks to your executive team to get FinOps, what are you going to put in that 10 slide deck? And then we could see this kind of pivot into, so now you've pitched it to your executive team, you maybe need to pitch it to your finance teams as well. And so that's our goal of this, is really to help curate that content that will be available to anybody in the organization. Next slide here. We're obviously going to start off right away of explaining what FinOps is. So a lot of you have already seen this slide before, brings financial accountability to the variable spend. That is something that we need to make sure our executive teams understand right off the bat and kind of differentiates us from some finance organizations. Go next slide. We'll want to define what success looks like. So this is another good slide that's put together, and what we'll want to do is make sure people can customize these slides themselves and add what they believe success will look like and what they think will target their executive team as well. I wanted to kind of share a little bit with you guys about Pearson and kind of how I had to go about pitching FinOps. And so what was really, really important to us is to find something that was really relatable to our executive team. So our executive team, they know about cloud, they know about the AWS well-architected framework. We preach that a lot to them. Our Amazon teams, spell that out very, very well. And so it was really important for me to do a correlation between, well, we believe in the well-architected framework. That framework has multiple pillars. One of the last pillars on it is the cost optimization pillar. And at that time, we didn't have anything around this. We kind of had people doing kind of a little bit of this job, but we weren't putting a lot of focus on it. And so I don't have the picture here, but we kind of showed like a pillar, all these different pillars holding up our products, right? And we were missing one of the pillars, which is cost optimization. And if you're missing one of your pillars, your whole thing's going to lean, right? And so that was kind of our initial pitch. And so it was really important, I think, when you go to pitch your executive teams, you know you frame this into something that's going to be familiar with them. And so this is kind of what we did is we need to add this additional pillar. They're going to be responsible for cloud financial management, billing management, and making sure we're doing effective cost management of our resources. And so this is the type of material I would hope that this working group would come out with, is things that are tangible, but also can be customized for your organization as well. Another slide deck that we presented to our executive teams was like the placement of this team. This often comes up a lot of like, where should FinOps org sit? And so you'll again want to like create your slide decks that adapt to this, but it's important that you do, probably call out this. And so what we kind of pitched is, yes, our dev teams are decentralized. Our SRE teams are centralized today. We believe that our FinOps team should also be a centralized service that sits with other core cloud foundation teams. So with our observability, monitoring teams, or release engineering. So FinOps is just part of that core foundation team that is a service out to the businesses. And we really pitched that this is the best way to get economies of scale. We would reduce costs. It would be a very simplified model. It would be a way for our executive teams to have direct visibility into our cloud spend. And the nice thing about FinOps too, when we do a FinOps pitch to executive teams, is we have something that a lot of new projects, new groups don't have, which is we have dollars that we can put behind it. And so very similar, we did a pitch to the team that was like, we have X millions in annual AWS spend, which is supporting X billion of digital revenue per finance. And so kind of correlating like the concept of how massive our spend is and how important it is because of the revenue that it supports. And I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but really honing in on that revenue, that total cost of ownership here, that those are keywords that are going to drive to your executive teams. We also wanted to explain the complexity of our state, right? We have AWS, misspelled there, AWS, Azure, GCP as well. We also want to talk about where we're going. So we still have 10 large data centers to be migrated, right? And so we're not done on our cloud journey. We have to optimize what we already have, but we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for what's coming next. We also want to talk about the capacity. So, we're building this team. We need a certain number of individuals. We're going to be supporting 40 SRE teams, 880 applications, right? So this is really powerful when you can present these type of numbers at an executive teams. And somebody asked, what is INO? So that's our team. It's called Infrastructure and Operations. That's where our FinOps team sits inside of that org. And then as far as opportunity, so again, we want to talk about where we were at. We were not doing so well, 4 years ago, 30% RI coverage. We had a base rate. We knew that we could optimize that base rate. And if we did that, we were going to save X millions of dollars. And so here again is another kind of powerful slide that you can put in front of your executive team. And then this was really important, is to visualize and explain the like, who are we, right? So I'm gonna fund you. I'm gonna give you tools. I'm gonna give you team. Like, what are you going to do? And so this was really a visual that we pointed out to them is, you may not want your finance team, talking directly to your cloud vendors. You don't want probably every SRE lead talking directly to your executive teams. And so our FinOps team here is, I would say it's like put a hug around all of this, or to be supporting all of this. And so as a FinOps analyst that we have in our teams, they are going to be working directly with finance to understand fully loaded costs. We're going to work with the business owners to help them benchmark and understand, where their optimizations are within their products. We're going to get that real-time data out to the SRE team so that they can make updates on the fly. We're going to be optimizing our rates and working on education programs with our cloud vendors. And then ultimately, we wanted to give those executive teams the security that we are going to set up the guardrails and visibility, that they don't have to, worry about cloud as much because you have a team that is worrying about it. And so this was another good pitch that we just explained, like how we're going to operate. So this is what I see as kind of growing out of this working group, is creating additional slide decks and creating additional material. Like we may have like a slide deck for your elevator pitch, your vision, your mission, maybe your core competencies, right? So there we could have a variety of slide decks that people can then go ahead and pull and choose from, and then adapt them for what works for their business. And going to the second, going to the second kind of persona that we saw here was really that executive team. So they may be asking how do you support a FinOps practice? Like, okay, I've gotten it now. What do we do after that? What do you need from me? And so we really need our executive teams taking action and being knowledgeable. We want them to be investing their time to understand cloud. We need them there to support different policies that we may enact. We want them to help us build incentive programs that people can get behind. And at times, we're going to need them to make executive mandates. And so all of those are kind of the asks that we're asking out of our executive teams. And so I think a big part of the FinOps Foundation is we can help equip our executives to be prepared to help support a FinOps organization. Here's a good example of one that we did at our company just months ago. I wanted to pitch that we, had an investment opportunity that we could buy more 3-year savings plan. So while working with the FinOps Foundation, I was able to ping 4 different companies one-on-one through Slack and kind of ask, what is your coverage? How many are you buying 3 years? And like, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision? And so using the foundation to kind of benchmark, I could go back to my company and say, hey, listen, here's some different companies that are in our same area or same category of spend. We're up there as coverage, same as the other companies are, but we're really, really low on our 3-year commit. And so I think that we should increase that, and we should think about the reasons why we should. And so, a good example here is like company A, they went 100% 3-year. I kind of wish they didn't do that because they would have left more room for spot migration considerations. So that's something I want our executive team to be aware of as well, why I wouldn't jump 100% 1 year, right? Company B has a good story to tell. They're at 90% coverage. They're completely out of the data center. That seems pretty reasonable that they kind of coast on that 90%, knowing that they don't have more coming. We have a lot in the data center coming, so we feel pretty confident of riding the high 90s. You've got company C who 100% coverage, 100% 3 years, but they didn't buy up front. Now they may be losing some discount points, but they brought up a really good point that it causes a lot of billing overhead. That was an awesome thing to also explain to my executive team to let them know the additional burden that does put on my team when doing the bill because we buy up front. And then company D was very interesting. They were 90% average and they had no 1-year commit. And it was interesting that after I, got this information 3 weeks later, company D actually sold off a big part of their business. And so there was probably a financial reasons of why they decided not to do that. So given those conversations, we ended our executive training talking about this, describing what savings plan are, kind of coming up what we wanted to do next. And we decided that our next savings plan purchase, we would go more in the 3-year. And we're waiting for some reorganizations of stuff to happen as well. And so this was a really powerful way to, present data to an executive team and let them be part of the decision making as well. And then I think my last slide here just kind of represents our FinOps impact. And so talk about build and rebuilding. I'm working on trying to pitch to our executive team to let us do the same thing that we've done for AWS and take that into multi-cloud, so Azure and GCP. And so this was a really helpful slide deck that we put together that said, here's been our forecast over the last, 6, 7, 8 years, and here's where our actuals have come in. And what's interesting is I'm trying to pitch to them to invest more in our FinOps team. And around like 2016, 2017, we actually went with a third party to manage our bill and our pricing strategy. And they did fine. They did, it was okay. But what we saw is a tremendous amount of growth. And we were just keep spending more money and we weren't really doing much optimization. And so around 2018 is when we launched our Pearson FinOps team. We consolidated some individuals that were doing that work together. And you can see for the first time in 2019, we actually started turning our spend downwards with doing optimization work. The other thing you can see as a trend is our forecast is growing versus before it was flat. And so we've worked with finance so they understand we can't just keep the cloud flat forever, right? And so this is again, I think another good visual to give an executive team. And so that's what kind of material I'm hoping this working group will build out here as well. So with that, I also want to introduce Mike and Dean. We just talked about how Accenture is joining as our newest premier member, and I'm really, really excited about this. These guys are both, FinOps strategists, cloud optimization experts, and so it's going to be really good to be partnering with them on this work group. So, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashley. That was good content. I love your slides. Okay, so quick introduction. I'm Mike Eisenstein. I'm joined by my colleague, Dean Oliver. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a second. I've been working in hyperscale public cloud governance for 7 years, cloud of some form for over 13 years. I've been running Accenture's cloud optimization practice for the last 2 years. So go to the next slide. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. It was July of 2014 when we hit a milestone that probably many of you have hit, which was when we got to 2 million lines in the cloud bill, in the AWS bill, which meant that we could no longer manage it through Excel. And so I was reflecting on the journey that we've been through, and we've tried all kinds of databases and all kinds of technologies and ideas. And it's been one curveball after another in this space. I do see the science of some of these third-party tools starting to catch up with the data and starting to mesh more nicely with the FinOps operation. I think the technology is ahead of process and procedure. On the technical side, if you look at things like this cluster of Orbitera kind of top right, we went live with it in July of 2018, and the next month it got acquired by Google, and then a year and a half later, they announced end of life or divestiture. We've since then seen the emergence of some stable vendors, and I think a lot of the acquisitions, the big acquisitions, are behind us. But as you've heard, even just from the intros on this call, there are new vendors in the space. There continues to be innovation going on there, but I do see an overall stabilization of the technical capability. You have technical things like sustained use discounts on the top left, committed use discounts, savings plans. We're also starting to see those, I think, stabilize somewhat. But I anticipate the cloud providers are going to continue to innovate in pricing models, which means more cost-effective ways to buy cloud, but it also means more churn for management. And I think that's going to be an ongoing part of the program, is handling that change. But when you get into some of sorry, if you look at the bottom right, December 2016, thanks for the arrow there, we were getting our monthly gut punch. So with our monthly bill, and this is what my boss called it at the time, our monthly gut punch. And we embarked on our cost optimization exercise, and we shaved off a ton of money, and we did it just in time. You can see in March of 17, just in time for cuts to come out. So that's the kind of thing that I think we will continue to see. If you look at the multi-legged thing up on top center, on 3 separate occasions, we broke Azure's billing system because our detailed billing data was so large. Now, Azure was great. They worked with us and they fixed this in days, or in one case, it was a couple of weeks. But we're going to continue to see that the limitlessness of cloud actually has limits, just like service limits that often go ignored until something breaks. But I think where the real opportunity is on the organizational, the practical, the practitioner, and frankly the political side. It's very much another story. So if you look at the bottom left, an early example of this was where one of our clients got cloud management and showback working in 6 weeks, but took over a year to get their SAP to where they could journal money between departments and thereby do chargeback. So it was less about cloud management and more about the financial processes. If you look at like the bottom center, in middle of 2017, one of Accenture's leaders made a really bold decision to allow a central team to keep money from RI arbitrage, which meant we were buying them centrally and keeping some of the benefit. And we funded a lot of really good innovation out of that. But as many of you could probably guess, it was a very charged, very political decision, cost a lot of political capital. So we had to do a lot to mature that conversation so it's not so politically expensive. This is one of the things that I look forward to working with Ashley's Adopting FinOps working group. So anyway, we've been working on this stuff, figuring out how to do it for several years now. Our first cost optimization project was just a few months after we did it internally. We realized that some of the models we had built, we could apply to clients. We actually worked with one of the prominent members of FinOps Foundation. If you look at kind of bottom right, the first FinOps client target operating model we did in August of 2019. It was barely called FinOps at the time. I know that. I think actually that's when you became a charter member, right? That's when things really were just getting going. So we've been participating in the space that is now called FinOps, and I've worked with actually some of the organizations on this call to develop the practice. And so anyway, we're formalizing our relationship with the foundation. We want to work with the broader community. We see a lot to do in this space. We see that the impact of cost of cloud on organizations is a really big impact. The Andreessen Horowitz article, I thought, quantified that very profoundly, even if I think there are some caveats to what they described. I'm excited about the growth. I mean, like, what are we getting? 10% month over month, JR. And I've seen the FinOps Foundation mature a lot in just the last year. The first State of FinOps survey was amazing stuff. I'm really looking forward to the second one coming up. So I encourage everyone to participate in that. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dean, who's been sort of my partner in crime developing this science for several years now.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. So I'm Dean Oliver. I'm part of Accenture's technology strategy and advisory practice, and I'm leading on cloud FinOps offerings in this space. Now, my background over the last 12 years has been primarily in major transformations to help organizations put in place new IT operating models, and more specifically enterprise portfolio management practices and the associated enabling technologies. Now, a lot of the principles and practices around investment portfolio management really translate into some of the core components of the FinOps space I've found. And over the last couple of years, I've transitioned formally that experience into FinOps, and I've been helping a number of large-scale global organizations basically adopt FinOps, and a lot of the points that Ashley said really resonated. And I've been doing that with both the central FinOps teams in terms of helping organizations set up that team, and also in the wider organization adoption. So in terms of the theoretical side, yes, that's really important. And if we move on to the next slide, but also in terms of my transformation experience, I've been in the weeds with the organizations, right from theoretical all the way to the end, whether that be a year, 2 years later, and getting the battle scars essentially of some of the problems that I've been seeing in the Slack channels around deep in the weeds things of how do you make the showbacks equal the chargebacks? How do you apportion correctly the shared service costs and also the benefits attributions if you're making central commitments, for example, and create transparency on that. And all of those really detailed things, we want to make sure that we're harvesting and formalizing so that we can use them within the FinOps Foundation and put them into other organizations to help accelerate this adoption. Now, this is a typical FinOps journey that we've been using as part of our overall transformations and helping clients come on with. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, especially in the assessment phase, is this is optional. So you've got two personas of clients. You've got the proactive clients that we're seeing who have really came in advance of moving material workloads to the cloud. They're on the front foot. They understand what FinOps is, and they skip the assessment because it's greenfield essentially. And we move through this process with them and help them implement those guardrails essentially up front and draw on a lot of the techniques and principles in order to do FinOps right. But what we're then seeing especially in a lot of the global organizations who are on the front foot with cloud, is they're very reactive on FinOps. The costs have spiraled out of control. The C-suite members are shouting at them to get them back under control, and they've suddenly decided that FinOps is relevant. And they generally go right through an assessment. And this is something, again, that we've built out, which helps them pinpoint areas of the FinOps framework, essentially, that are flagging bright red and are hotspots to fix. And then they move more through a rapid type version of this journey in order to fix some of the more deep underlying rooted problems that have caused them not to achieve their expected value from their investment in cloud. So if you just move to the next slide, as I was saying, in terms of the FinOps Foundation and Accenture, what we want to try and do is, leading from Mike's view of how Accenture have moved right the way through cloud financial operations delivery over the last 6 years, and also the fact that Accenture are 96% in the cloud themselves as a company, we want to make sure all those detailed sets of information are captured, or they've already been captured, and that we can start to use that to collaborate on thought leadership with the FinOps Foundation and make this real for all of the other organizations and to help them and to help give back, really. We want to also make sure from an advanced perspective that we're driving the hyperscalers and the cloud providers to take into account some of these things when we're not seeing them in the cloud native tooling or in the cloud cost management tooling. So we're not organizations aren't waiting 6 months to fix these things in the tool, and they can just be accelerated straight away from the moment they get that tool in place. And then from an adoption perspective, again, specifically to Ashley's points, we want to make sure that all those stickiest challenges, that we're really getting in place the key components of what they need to do, how they can overcome these challenges quickly, and things like making engineers accountable for the spend, how we really use gamification and some of the techniques we've drawn out to accelerate that and embed FinOps and make sure that it's not just an isolated central FinOps function, but we've really unpacked it into the organization and drawn on all of the different perspectives that come into it. And then finally, in terms of the expansion, starting to look at other things in more rich detail, like the unit economics and the business value top down, and how they can really see how they're getting the value from the cloud spend. And it's very, very easy to see it from a theoretical perspective, but actually tracing business metrics through to the cloud infrastructure and the spend in the past, it's so difficult. So all of those expansion points, we really want to not just give, but we want to learn as well and collaborate and make sure that we're bringing the best of this foundation to fully resolve these problems and see where they fit within the foundation and the FinOps framework. That's everything from me. Thanks, Jar.
Thank you, Dean and Mike. Welcome. Excited to have you here. And yeah, these slides are great. I hope we can borrow some of this for our larger storyline about how to help adopt FinOps. On that topic, yeah, this working group is kicking off. Ashley, again, thanks for leading this. If you want to get involved, put your hand up in this channel, Adopting FinOps. You can follow along or actually spend time. The working group model is these groups spend 4 to 6 weeks spending real time, building out decks, building out playbooks, et cetera. So if you want to be part of that, that's here. There's going to be a meeting coming up on July 16th. Easy button is email Tracy, who you're going to hear from later, about how to get involved, and she can help get you plugged in all the various places.